you could tell by the tone of my voice, that to me is almost anathema to deny what to me, what photography is about, which is about being awake to light
Mm.
and to turn your photography into a subject orientation. You shut yourself off to the world.
Well, hey everyone. Welcome to episode 385 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen with your host, Matt Payne. This week on the podcast, I sat down and chatted with Claude Fiddler. Claude is most well known for his books about the Sierra. However, he joined me this week to discuss his newest book project focused on the Brooks Range of Alaska. Since so few photographers have ventured into the Brooks Range, I thought it would be a great opportunity to discuss it. Well, this week's episode is brought to you by Nature Photographers Network. NPN is still my favorite hangout for nature photography and landscape photography. It is a community of like-minded photographers ranging in experience level from beginner all the way to full-time professional. It is a very inviting and welcoming place for all photographers of all levels. My favorite aspect of NPN is looking at all of the great photography that is submitted there and learning from everyone's honest and thoughtful critiques of images. Even if you don't submit your own work for critique, you can gain valuable insight by reading the critiques that are over there or by critiquing other people's images. For just $49 per year, you can join the community on NPN and gain access to the critique forums, as well as other amazing benefits, including fantastic articles, webinars, discounted tutorials, software, books, and a lot more. And don't forget Nature Vision magazine, which is an incredible publication that NPN is starting to put out. It's a great place, and I'd love to see you there. Just head over to npn.link/fstop to join. Use the code FSTOP10 for a 10% off discount. That's npn.link/fstop. Okay, let's get to this week's conversation with Claude Fiddler. All right, Claude Fiddler, it's great to have you back on the podcast.
It's great to be back, Matt. It's good to see you, and you got a great smiling face, and that's good to see.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think the first time we recorded, there was no video, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank goodness.
For you. Thank goodness for you. Exactly. Yeah. Your computer screen might explode with how ugly the transmission is here.
No.
All right. Well, Claude, it's been a while, and it's going to be great to catch up. For those of listeners that aren't familiar with you and the photography that you're engaged in, why don't you tell us a little bit about who Claude Fiddler is?
I'm a photographer, and I do not do it professionally. I worked for 15 years running the Mono County construction and maintenance for all the facilities. And then prior to that, I was a private contractor. And those were both rewarding and successful careers. Prior to that, I was a rock climber, a mountaineer. And I did that really seriously for 10 years, 15 years, and went to Mount Everest in 1983 and climbed in Yosemite a lot. And I was also a photographer with a large format camera. And that started with a large format in 1983. I used a large format with one lens, a Linhof 4, with a 150 millimeter Rodenstock lens, the only lens I used, and sheet film, of course. And I loved it, and I was really serious about it. And I had a number of friends who were also into large format photography. And I knew Galen Rowell. I climbed with Galen Rowell. He was, of course, not a large format photographer, but Vern Clevenger and Jim Stimson and Steve Solinsky and Joseph Holmes and John Warzenek became and still are very dear friends of mine. And so I headed down that road, which I think a lot of the audience as, you just kind of see that magical moment when, well, in my case, when the transparencies came back, and you just go, "Oh my God, this is just magical." And it it became a different part of my relationship in the out of doors.
Mm.
Climbing was never, I never photographed climbing. I never photographed skiing. That was an experience and an activity that was really intense, and I could not see bringing the camera up and composing a photograph and trying to make a picture while I was climbing. Whereas when I was out on extended trips in the mountains, I could see taking my time and setting up compositions and just being alive in that revelry that we all know. And the 4x5, the large format camera, really suited me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, it, I never took a lot of pictures. I still don't take a lot of pictures. And I rarely walked around with a camera. I just walked around with a viewing card and went,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah. It's funny. I recently read a book about the Sierras, and
singular Sierra.
yeah, yeah. See, I'm
Okay.
a Colorado guy, so like,
You're
I,
forgiven?
yeah, I'm like I'm constantly learning about California, but it's interesting because the in the back of the book, there's a Kim Stanley Robinson book. I think it's
Hmm.
called My Love Affair with the Sierra or something like
Hmm.
that. In the back of the book, he has all these recommended readings, and lo and behold, there was your book, and I thought that was super cool to see that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So what Matt is referring, thank you, by the way. What Matt's referring to is my first book, which was published by Chronicle Books in 1995. It was one of those things that I thought at the time that I had a real body of work, and I'd been at it for 10, 15 years, something like that. And looking and looking back at it, I go, no, no, you really, you kind of didn't. But that was that was that was during the time when a photo or a book, that a photo book was kind of a rare deal.
Hmm.
The Sierra Club had their large format books, and they worked with Elliot Porter a lot and others. But Elliot Porter is the most well known photographer. So it was just a different thing. There weren't a whole lot of photo books out there, and
Hmm.
and the two books that I really gravitated toward, Desert Contos and Cape Light, were museum catalogs. So, which ended up being, pretty, not pretty, but very famous books. But that was their intent. So, anyways, I kind of lucked out with my relationships in the photo world, and ended up being published. And it was a very, well, it was very different. And then there were similarities between then and now
Yeah,
getting
yeah,
published.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's super hilarious that you said I've been photographing for 15 years, and I thought I had a body of work, and looking back, I didn't, because it's one of those things I always think is so funny in terms of perspective. As landscape photographers, I have friends of mine who I personally think have some of the best bodies of work around. And if you talk to them, they're like, yeah, I'm not even where close to having enough photos for a book yet. And then you talk to other people who've been in it for like 10 minutes, and they're like, I'm ready to publish a book. And it's always so interesting to hear people's kind of self-perception about whether or not they have enough high quality images that they can create a very high quality book. And I just think that perspective is fascinating.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to ask the people who think after a short period of time that they're ready to do a book, if they if they how many photographs of Edward Weston's they've looked at, how many photographs of Ansel Adams they can remember and name, and I bet it would be a really small or zero number. I mean, the perspective, historical perspective is
For sure.
really important.
For sure. And we're in a totally different age now. I mean, the transition has happened where you can go out for a year, dedicate a year with digital. And if you're really talented, you can make a lot of really interesting images in just a year. And there's some other people amongst us where you can go out for 20 years and make an amazing body of work and still not feel like you're ready. So it's just an interesting thing.
It, it, it also has to, I think, has to do with the genre that you're involved with, and for us, those of us who are involved with a place, and
Mm.
congratulations on your hike. Uh, and Bree did a great interview. I lit that with you.
Oh yeah, that
Uh,
was fun. Thank
yeah,
you.
I bet it sounded like it. You realize and I think I can say that, you know, the Rockies or the Sierra, or then you could get more grand, the Himalaya or the Amazon, and those are kind of obvious that you're not going to see all of it and have a quote unquote body of work that really takes a look at the different characteristics of the place. It's just bound to take years. But I'm sure. Well, I shouldn't say I'm sure, but I think that you probably have some places around home and close by that you go back to, and and each time you go back, if it's an interesting place, you notice something else, and
For sure.
you'll go back at a different time of year, and you go, oh, look at that.
Oh, no
And then,
doubt. No doubt.
yeah, and then you go in the morning, or you go in the evening, or you go during a thunderstorm cycle, or you go during when flowers are starting to happen, or it's fall or it's spring. And then an an intimate, and I mean intimate with yourself and the place, not small images, smaller looks at things. And that body of work could take years to
Decades.
yes, yeah, and that's a wonderful thing. So
It is.
I don't, I don't get it. I don't. Even if your genre is street photography, fashion photography, nudes in the landscape, whatever it might be, I don't see how it happens right away. Richard Avedon, I mean, no. It's I can't I can't see how you're the phenom in, a year's time.
No, I'm with you there, but it is an interesting perspective thing.
Yes,
So people might be wondering why we're even talking about landscapes in this way. And one of the things that I'm really excited to talk to you about is the project that you're currently working on, which is a book showcasing the Brooks Range in Alaska, which is a place that I feel like probably 95% of people on Earth probably have never even heard of it, or maybe
right.
once or twice they've heard of it. They don't really have an idea of what it looks like. And so I'm really interested to hear you tell us a little bit about what your project is all about, and maybe you can kind of enlighten us on the Brooks Range in general as well.
Sure. So in 1983, I got invited on a Brooks Range trip, and this I was at Tioga Pass Resort, and I lived up there and was climbing in Tuolumne, and this guy described this trip, and it sounded really fascinating. He said, we're going to drop a boat here, we're going to hike over. The last trip we did, we saw 14 grizzly bears, two wolverines, 3,000 caribou. And so I looked at it a little bit more closely by way of the Sierra Club bulletin, and I went, wow, this it looks like a cool place. And Anwar, Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, didn't happen until I think 1960. I mean, Alaska wasn't a state until 1959.
Right.
So, so I got fascinated, but I was still a climber, and I got invited to go to Mount Everest, so I went. So I went to Mount Everest. But then later, in 19 not what was it 2002, I decided I wanted to reconnect with a couple of old friends. And I racked my brain and I went, what about that Brooks Range trip that I was thinking about? And one of my friends was a Grand Canyon dory guide, and another friend was the avalanche forecaster and a very close Sierra friend. So I just made the phone calls and said, "Hey, let's do this trip." And I had no idea what that trip was. So anyways, we all just kind of got together and said, let's go down this river, the Hula Hula River. And I knew about that from the other trip that was described to me. And I said, okay. And I had a friend who was a bush pilot in Alaska on the North Slope, and he had been a bush pilot for 20 years. He was no longer at that time, but I talked to him and he said, yeah, you can do it. And here's who you need to contact and blah, blah, blah. And so I got a few of the logistics out of the way. We did this trip. We landed at this airstrip. I won't go through all the details of the trip, but you're always in the Brooks Range. You're going to have a bush flight from somewhere, and you're going to fly 400 miles or 200 or whatever, but you're going to have a bush flight to get into a landing strip wherever that might be in the Brooks. Got a raft with polar bear bites in it. It was, and we landed, and I got out of the plane, the Cessna 182, and I went, "Oh my God!" There was just color everywhere. The the
Mm.
the It was late August, and the tundra was just psychedelic. I mean, reds, greens, blues, purples, yellows, and it was everywhere. You couldn't, and then lichens on the rock were orange, yellow, and the hills were not dramatic or magnificent or anything like that, but just what was in front of you was mind-boggling. And I had not felt that in a while, but that whole, I got to take, what am I going to do? Oh, how am I going to make this, interpret this? How I need to take a picture, and I just went, no, 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 wait a second, Anyway, so we headed down the river, and that's a typical way of traveling in the Brooks Range, is doing a river trip, because hiking is another animal.
Right. A lot of bushwhacking, I suspect, with
It's not
willows
it's
and
not bushwhacking, but it's one of those, Matt, where 20 feet along a caribou trail where you're just walking is like a rest, because you're always moving over tussocks, down through some brush, over river cobble, cross a stream.
right.
So 6 miles is a big day in the Brooks.
Yeah.
Anyways, on day 4, I think, I I had finally just gotten into that space where I was going, okay, I know it's out here, but I can't, I'm not going to force, I'm not going to force an image. The Brooks Range is going to work in its own terms with my photography. And then, and plus I was with a 4x5, and plus, we had to travel, and plus then stop, and then, get out there and walk around, and then finally I saw something, and went, and click, pun intended. And then and then kind of that initial drive and getting over it was over. I went, that's it. If that's the only picture I take, I'm good. That was such a good image that said it all to me in the moment. Everything was right. It was balanced. It's with the Linhof. It's with the 4x5. It's just, I don't have to take another picture. I
Nice.
can just let the place do its thing to me. I definitely didn't come away from that trip and go, oh, gee, I'm going to do a book. I'd better submit an article to Outdoor Photographer. That part of photography was never something that I needed to do. I had a career, I had a wife, I had a child, I had a way to make a living. And even though photography wasn't, like I said, was still very intense and I'm very driven when I do it. And it isn't a pastime. Um, and I didn't have to go and pursue trying to make a living at it. And it wasn't until maybe 4 trips later, and you'll love this. I think I have 151 pictures from the Brooks over
Oh
20
wow.
years. So it was, I maybe started to think about it. And also my travels were expanding. I was going to different places. And remember, it's 700 miles long. It's a big place.
Yeah.
It's a really big place, and it extends from the Beaufort Sea, the Arctic Ocean, to the south side of the Brooks, and so and there's it's a maze. It's river drainages going north, south, east, west, just and then the weather comes from the Arctic Ocean. It comes from the west as an arm of a storm front. It comes from the south. It's fog. It's constantly changing. It's light changing. I think like you've never seen before.
Mm-mm.
It can be hour to hour, minute to minute, boom 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 boom, just changing, and then add on top of that the fall color that happens, and it becomes and then you have the tundra, you have willow, you have rivers, you have peaks, and so it's a varied landscape, and it has its own character, very different
So
from.
so you first went 2002, 2001, 2002, I think you said. How many total trips did it take, and when was your last trip?
My last trip was last year, and that's 13 trips, and I'm not done. I'm going this coming summer, and
Okay.
I'll place hold a couple of spots for the see what happens this summer. But I, judging, not judging, but thinking about what's going to happen big landscape wise. I'm pretty sure if the lighting happens, there'll be some really neat possibilities.
So this is something I'm always curious about. So, you probably made a few trips and you were like, wow, I think I have something here that I can put into a book someday. So I'm curious, like, as you were progressing through your visits in the Brooks Range, seeing these varied landscapes as you described, how then did you decide, okay, like, did you have a shot list? Did you have specific places you wanted to go to? Did you have specific scenes in your mind that you wanted to capture for the book? Like, you're going back, so are you trying to fill a couple of holes that you feel are missing in the book? Like, tell me about that process of approaching it from a project perspective.
Approaching it from a project perspective, it just so happened that I traveled to the far west in the Brooks Range, and then central, and then all the way out to the east. And there was a method to that madness. It was okay. I want to see that part of the Brooks, and I want to see that part of the Brooks, and then I want to see that part. And the Brooks, like the Sierra or like the Rockies, has a lot of similarities to it, right? But still, each place, like each lake basin or each set of peaks or each little sub range, has its differences. It didn't become. It was always, the project was driven by, I wanted to see a different part of the place. And the Brooks has the north side is the classic, the calving grounds of the caribou herds, and that just extends in this big, huge flat out to the Beaufort Sea. That's a whole different characteristic to it. And then there are the mountains with the drainages and the rivers coming off of it. And then the south side becomes that you start getting into spruce forest. So a whole different other characteristic happens. And so I just started designing trips where, I'd see as much as possible, but I was never subject oriented. Oh, I need to get the flower photo. I need to get the bird photo. I need to get the migrating caribou photo. I need to get the wolverine photo. I need to get the coastal photo. I need to get the spruce tree photo. I need to get the springtime photo. I need to get the winter photo. That, you can tell by the tone of my voice, that to me is almost anathema, to deny what to me, what photography is about, which is about being awake to light,
Mm.
and to turn your photography into a subject orientation. You shut yourself off to the world. You said, I have an agenda, I have an expectation, I'm going to tell the world what it is I want. That's really egotistical in a way. It's not very self-aware. It's not it's not letting the world work on you. You want to work
Mm.
on the world. And as we know, as we've aged, I'm older than you, but it doesn't work that way. You're not going to see the the amazing parts because you're going to have an agenda.
Yeah, that all makes sense. So from the project perspective, what have been some of the main challenges that you've had to overcome? I mean, obviously it's really far away, but
It
what are some of the other challenges?
Well, it's really far away. It's not inexpensive to fly, bush flight.
Right?
It's how long are you going to go to the Brooks Range for, Dad? Okay, 6 weeks in the Brooks Range is a long time. So there's that. And so the Brooks Range is an inhabited place, and it's been in. There's a whole. Remember that was the migration into North America, and the settling of North America happened through the Brooks Range, the Ice
Mm.
Age migration, right? Every tribe from Newfoundland to Chile came from the Brooks Range. It's amazing. That's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And those people, or the remnants, or the ancestors of those people, are still there. It's their homeland. And we've built a pipeline through it. We've built Prudhoe Bay through it. We've built the Hall Road through it. And there are proposals for more stuff to happen. And so one of the challenges, and a big one, was my daughter said, "Hey, Dad, what have you done about permission from the indigenous people, from the native Alaskans?" I said, "I'm taking landscape pictures. Permission? I'm doing my trips." And then I went, wait a second, I better think about that. So I thought about it, and I looked into it a little bit, and I went, this book project ain't going to happen without consent, number one. So I went to Arctic Village, and I went to the tribal council. I brought my Inside the High Sierra book, and I said, I'm here to ask your permission, do a book, and to continue to work in your home. And at that point in time, 2 years ago, I told myself, if they say no, I'm done. I won't publish the book. Big moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the tribal council said, we want you to do this. You have our consent. And I
Nice.
said, so, but there are many communities, and you can't contact them all. And so you have to, or I have to live with how I feel about, the uh, working in someone else's home, and what that, how, what does that mean? Yeah, their permission, their their culture is really important at this point in time. And I'm not doing a book about their culture. but this is a book about their place.
Right.
Yeah, that's a that's a challenge.
No
That's a
doubt.
personal challenge to really think about.
Well, and I'm
And
guessing on top of all that, seems to me, at least on paper, that it would be a fairly physically demanding landscape. And as you insightfully notified us just now that, neither of one of us are young, strapping young lads. So
no,
how has your age impacted your ability to work on the project, if at all?
I don't think it's impacted it. I'll be 68 in July, and I go running and do workout, and then if I can before a Brooks trip, I'll try and go on a 7 to 10 day Sierra trip,
Hmm.
which will get me in good shape. And so I haven't had I've had injuries before a trip that have scared me, where I'd go, oh dear, what did I just do? I mean, in a week and a half, I got to put on a 70-pound pack and start walking. And last year's trip was a 160-mile trek, and it was very arduous, and the weather was not great. And but I have really good partners, mountain guides, story guides, people who are really together physically, and they're they're up to it when the suffering inevitably happens.
Right.
So yeah, that's a that's a blessing.
Well, maybe on
So
the flip side of that, how has your age been of benefit?
I don't have the I've really kind of never had this. I don't have this hyper nervousness about making art. I realize
Hmm.
that it's gonna come as it will. And I've been through enough experiences that how do you deal with, okay, here's day 5 of really crappy weather, or
Right.
how are we going to dry out? When are we going? Do we need to stop? Do we need, what? How are we going to deal with this? Or, for instance, we got to one supposed food drop this last trip, and it wasn't there.
Right.
And it's and we're sitting there, and we're gonna be out of food. We aren't going to eat, and it's like, okay, what do we do?
Hmm.
And luckily we had the means of contacting the bush pilot, and saying, and then it was like, where's that airstrip? And it and it's 7 miles down the road. Well, 7 miles is not, you aren't going to just go and do that in the Brooks.
Right.
Anyway, then we had, 4 years ago, we were getting to a cache where we had 3 boats dropped off, 2 pack rafts and a inflatable one-person kayak. Well, the pack rafts were shredded, and so we had to repair one of them, get it back to where, and one was just gone. And so we had to, well, do we push the SOS button? And we really didn't want to do that. We just thought about it. Hey, we'll trade off. One person will walk for a day, 2 people will be in the boats. We ended up, all 3 of us, in the boats, which was hysterical. Anyway, so I think those kind of experiences where a lot of people would just go in reach, SOS, bink, and get me out of here. And so there's age has brought on, not only that, brought on determination, and the people I'm with could get pretty darn determined in a tough situation.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, planning, problem solving, and a little bit of wisdom to
Yeah,
know that you're going to be able to get through it because you've been through something that potentially is similar or worse. So having, that hindsight of understanding what your limitations are and how to get through things, I think that makes a lot of sense.
it does. Yeah.
All right, Claude. Well, I know you're a huge fan of focusing a lot of energy on a smaller number of locations, such as the Sierra and the Brooks. Obviously, as we discussed earlier, this offers the photographer intimate knowledge of place, which I think, and I think you agree, leads to better, more personally meaningful photographs. How has that approach to making images informed your body of work, especially in the Brooks range?
Well, I think going back to your prior question, the age and where the Brooks is, age is a limitation at this point in time for me. How many more years, right, do I have? And I'm okay with that. And to, where that gets to with your question is okay. I can't just say I'm going to do Peru or now I'm going to do the cathedrals, of France, or what you realize that, or I realized that I have to stay, here comes the pun, focused, and and that's fine. And I'm only going to get so much, and I don't have to be willy nilly and trying to get to the next place. I just have to be awake in the moment that when light happens, if it's on my hike here at home or in the Brooks Range, that I I'm fully there, and I just I don't see. Do I wish? I don't even know if I wish for to get to another place, because I don't even know that I wish for that. And what am I going to do? Oh my God, start another project? No, I'm really satisfied with just really auguring it. I mean, 20 years of trips in the Brooks and however many, a lifetime in the Sierra. I'm blessed. I'm blessed.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, what we're talking about is you kind of have to make a decision, I think, a little bit in terms of going broad or going deep. And I personally, I don't necessarily think there's a right or wrong approach to photography, but I think if you choose to go broad in terms of like, I want to visit every bucket list location that I have, while that offers you with a lot of different experiences that have variety, I think you can also miss out on having that really deep personal connection with one or two places. And so, you know, I personally don't think one is better than the other, but I think they're very different ways of approaching the craft.
Yes, I think my really good friend Steve Solinsky, um, you wouldn't you wouldn't call his photographs of the mundane, but people would go, well, okay, he just took a picture of a bathroom window, or that he just took a picture of a trash can, literally. And he's just a present person, and so when Joe's like that too, Holmes, it's like he'll just it's wonderment in the moment, living
Mm.
in the moment. And I'm not the world's greatest person at doing that, but you miss out on that. And in today's day and age, I mean, well, let's see. I'm going to go to the Faroe Islands, and then I'm going to go to. Then I better get to the Alps. Good Lord, Kyrgyzstan is just waiting. I mean, mountain. And the Caucasus. When am I going to get to the Caucasus?
Right.
And
Or like for me, it's like the one other place that I really, really would love to spend a lot of time is Patagonia. But I mean, talk about, commitment and access. And I mean, that's just a massive, I mean, that's a place I feel like I could spend months and months and months and still not satiate my curiosity for what it would be like to photograph it. And so then it becomes, gosh, in order for me to do that place justice, I need to commit like several months of my life every year just to do it. So
It's probably a go and live there,
yeah,
right?
exactly, right. And then it's like, how do you do that when you have you have a 16-year-old kid and you're married? That doesn't usually fly too well with the family. So
No, so yeah, yeah. It's a. I wouldn't even call it a conundrum. It's just it is what it is.
well, I mean, we're so lucky to have these choices, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's the main
Well,
reason why chose to live where I live is I'm at the base of all of my favorite mountains in the world, and I have a very special connection to this place. And on any given summer day, I can drive 45 minutes, and I can be, within 2 hours, I can be on top of a 13,000-foot mountain with an incredible view. So, like
right,
that's intentional. So,
right.
I think perhaps maybe a better question to ask is like how can you find that love of place and put that intentionality into it to make it part of your lifeblood. The how and the why, I think, are the important questions to ask.
Yeah, I think there are also stages in a life, right? I mean, either by way of wisdom or just by resignation. I'm sure people just go, "Oh man, this is it for me," and you come to a comfort with where you're at, and yeah, I think we're talking about some real first world problems here, Matt. I mean, right?
Exactly.
I mean, give me right. We're not living under a blue tarp in New Delhi in 120-degree weather, on the side of a thoroughfare.
Right.
It's yeah, we're pretty darn privileged, lucky, etc. Yeah.
I totally agree. And I often question my own behavior in terms of like how much time do I want to spend visiting hundreds of places across the planet versus like really investing my time getting super deep into like two or three, maybe four tops places, especially at this point in my life. I'm 45, so like I've, there's a end point where, and I don't know, I've been approaching my life lately, like tomorrow could be the last day. So, and that puts things into perspective as well. It's like, I don't think there's a right answer, but I think there are questions that I think people should be asking themselves in terms of how do they want to spend their time on this earth? Because
Yeah.
we don't have that
Yeah.
much of it.
No. The other part of that is exploring different genres of photography, right?
For sure.
Landscape photography just kind of puts you out there into we need to get out into landscape. Well, there are other things going on in the world that photographically might be really interesting. And I'm not saying, oh, gee, as an assignment, go and photograph a Fourth of July parade. I'm saying, you might find the world interesting in other ways, in other places, and it might really, yeah, get you to see different parts of the world that have nothing to do well, or just aren't landscape photography.
Oh,
So,
absolutely. I mean, I just did a 10-day workshop in Paris, and most of
mhm,
that was street photography or, cityscapes.
mhm.
And to give myself an even further challenge, I decided to photograph most of it in infrared. So
Oh,
like it was
okay,
super fun, like
yeah.
looking at a totally different genre through a totally different lens, literally like different filters. And for me, that was just a fun challenge. Like how can I bring what I have to bring to the table as a photographer and try to interpret this experience in a different way? And so I think that's one of the most exciting things about photography is that we get to decide that for ourselves. We get to choose how much challenge we want to give ourselves. We get to choose how weird we want to get with our imagery, or we can be super vanilla, just copy what other people have already done. And that, if you love that, that's cool too. But that's the beauty of this craft is you get to make those choices. So it's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, where were you? Right in Paris, or?
Right in the thick of it. Yeah.
Oh, great. Oh, good for
Yeah, I
you.
spent hours and hours and hours on the metro, so
Hmm.
I even picked up a little bit of French as well,
Good for you.
and a
Oh,
speeding ticket while I was there, so that was good.
did you go to the Louvre?
Went to the Louvre a couple times. That was a really awesome experience as well.
Yeah.
Um, One of my favorite experiences. We had our workshop there, and I was trying to teach. But that Louvre, I don't. Have you been there?
4 times.
A few times. Okay, so what's interesting about it is you get into that huge courtyard with the pyramids, and there's a lot of negative space in the foreground with it's just concrete slabs. And there was a guy there because we went there at night, and there was a guy
Mm.
there who had on rollerblades, and his rollerblades had like they had neon lights, so they lit up when he rode them. And so I was like, oh man, this is gonna be cool. So I did a like super long exposure, and I had him on his rollerblades, like riding through the concrete scene, leading up into the Louvre. So I actually used the kind of interesting street environment to my advantage to photograph the scene. So it's fun to try to just incorporate whatever you can find and whatever you get to. And I think that's kind of like what you were talking about, like just being awake and being observant and following the light, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then not to mention the artwork in the Louvre, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Don't
that's
even
another
go there,
story.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
All right, Claude. Well, I'm going to try to get us a little bit back on track. So,
Okay.
your previous book, The High Sierra, I know that you created some wood block slip cases, which
I
I
did.
think I think would be hard for people to kind of envision. So maybe tell us a little bit about what those look like, or you can show us probably.
I can show you. I thought,
And what did the actual process entail in terms of creating them, and why did you choose to go in that particular direction?
um, okay. So this is
Oh, yeah, that looks awesome.
so yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Uh, so this is made out of reclaimed wood, foxtail pine, which is a cousin to the bristlecone pine. We counted the rings. It's 1,000-year-old wood. There was a 60. There is. It's one piece of wood. There's not two. There's not three. There's not four. It's one, and it's been scored and then folded together and then glued and held together. The process, it took 5 prototypes, and then it took a week of actually making the boxes, gluing them together, taping them, and holding them together. You can see the joints.
Yeah,
There
yeah.
is there is no joint, and then you see how the grain starts and goes all the way through.
That's
It's
cool.
one piece of wood.
Yeah, that's
And
awesome.
yeah, so I mean, here's the brag. I said I'm going to make the best slipcase ever made for a book, and I just happened to I knew this wood miller. He told me that he had this reclaimed wood. Figured out the prototype. We figured out that you had to have 16 inches by 30 inches of perfectly flat wood out of a pine tree in the Sierra. So we just had these stacks of wood. 60% of it was unusable. Finally got the boards, rough cut them, took them to my friend's shop, who's a master woodworker. And we had done the prototype out of masonite, so we knew how to, what we need to do. So cut the wood, join the wood, send it through, then white belt sanded it, and then put it through a CNC machine. CNC machine is a big, huge router. Just came down, did the cuts, did the engraving. Just the engraving took us 3 different times to get the engraving right. Now it's very flimsy. And so we take this one piece of wood, slide it onto a piece of plywood, take it over, slide it onto the bench. Then I would fold it all, glue it. I mean, with a very and not you don't want the glue oozing out because you're not gonna sand this. So glued it very carefully, taped it. That took 3 days for it was only to make 45 boxes, something like that, and took them all apart, sanded every box down to 220 grit sandpaper, cleaned them all up. Then I used Rubio Monocoat 2-part stain, not stain, but a natural stain, which is VOC 0. The European Union approves it for toys in the European Union. And then 2 days of finishing, and then you've got this. It can't all of a sudden collect dust. So all of those 45 boxes had to be separated and sitting out there for 5 days of curing, and then I finally, that was it. Then I was able to deliver them, and oh, by the way, this foxtail pine,
Yeah.
I was only able to make 5 of them. The
Wow.
Western white pine, I was able to make 40 of them. It was just this was just very delicate wood, and
Hmm.
anyway, it was really fun. I really
So,
enjoyed it.
how long have you been off of your medication? Because that it just seems like quite an undertaking.
It was, but I worked with David Kuznets in Bishop. He's just a really close friend, and this is not kind of his garage. This is a big, huge wood shop
Gotcha.
with yeah. So he's a genius. He's just a woodworking genius. He started doing cabinets and fine wood. The first project I saw him do was he built a hammer dulcimer for his wife's Christmas present.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, it was it. I just when I did the book Inside the High Sierra, it was an art object. It was the just everything was, I just really, I wanted everything to be just right, and I wanted it to just all work together. And so when someone picked it up, I mean, even the paper is 203 grams per meter squared,
Mhm.
NGI paper from Japan, it's archival paper.
Hmm.
And 6 different tests of the correct varnish to put on it. 4 months of color proofing, just
Oh,
to
it's,
get it right.
I was gonna say, like, if you're a perfectionist at all and have a very high level of, attention to detail and want your book to be as perfect as possible, it is so much work, especially now. I mean, I was just talking to my wife about this last night because we had some issues with our year 3 book for the Natural Landscape Photography Awards, and the printer we use, they do a great job, but the binding just got messed up. And so they had to rebind all the books, which caused a delay. And it's like I feel like there's only like 2 or 3 or 4 really reputable bookmakers in the world nowadays that can meet those kind of exacting specifications, especially for someone like you who like has to have these, like, okay, I have to have this paper and this varnish and this, like all these specifications. And man, and like there's so many things that can go wrong in that process. And I'm curious to hear your experience in terms of, getting the final product ready. Like you felt like it was good to go. I mean, how long did that take you?
2 years,
Yeah,
every
exactly.
every 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 day.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, yeah, every day. These are the copy edits.
yeah.
Yeah,
And for
yeah,
people who aren't watching, it was like a stack of like 2 feet thick of just paper.
yeah. And every color proof was 6 to 9 tests, and just the copy edit went, until we got to the penultimate page on the last sentence had a double period. Oh, no, no, no. The designer went back, and I sat down with the designer. I was actually at a table with the designer, and I said, Mackenzie, there's a double period there. And I would just sit there with a red pencil or pen and just circle the mistakes. And then I put post-it notes. And so the stack would just have post-it notes all over it until finally it was down to one post-it note. Double period, need to get rid of the double period. And I had many people look. I had 4 complete sets of copy edits. You must know Jeff Hockey,
No. Mm-mm.
Wolverine Press. So he was one of the copy editors. He went through the everything completely twice. No, the M dash, it needs a space on both. I mean,
Right, right.
no, there's a widow on page 65. I mean, endless. And I mean, but when I don't mean to inflect that I didn't enjoy myself. I was just another obsessive compulsive, episode in my life.
Yeah, no, I mean it's funny because last year, you know, we're under tight timelines because we have to, turn around a book within, 3 months of the end of the projects or of the competition. So perfectionism is not the name of the game for us, but even still, we had 3 or 4 people look through the text. Everyone was like, "Yeah, it looks great," and then we print it and we get it in our hands, and something about having the physical thing in your hand, you start seeing other things too. So it's quite a process to make a book if you've never done it before.
Yeah, it is. And I guess for your audience, I would say that if books, I think, are a great way to present your work, right? It's classic. I mean, prints, I really love making prints, but books can just be such a beautiful object.
Hmm.
And so it I mean, it does take time. And then on the back end of it, you have, distribution and marketing, and all of that.
Right.
And that's a whole nother process. That's not easy.
So I wanted to ask you for your Brooks Range book that you haven't produced yet, are you going to do something similar with the slipcover for that? Something Brooks Rangey?
Uh-huh. Yep. I I I already bought the reclaimed Alaskan spruce.
Oh,
And
come
it's
on, man. Like
it's
you could use
it's
like reclaimed caribou antlers or something. I
oh,
mean,
that I'm not going to give away everything I'm going to do with the spruce, but it's not just the spruce.
okay,
So
okay.
so so
So you're gonna
it
like
the
inlay it with like some kind of mineral that you can only find in the Brooks Range or something.
just I'm not even gonna give you let you get a clue.
Well, that's awesome. So, Claude, I think this has been great. I learned a lot about what it would take to undertake a project of the Brooks Range. I'm curious for other people looking to do something similar in their photography career, perhaps make a book going deep into a place that they have a awesome relationship with. What advice would you have in terms of being successful in that project?
One of the challenges is also I work with writers.
Oh
And
yeah,
so I've got a lot of moving parts to coordinate, and they have lives. There's a whole nother element
absolutely.
which is there. So to someone, you need to have a good idea. It
Mm,
can't just be, it has to be a superb idea. It has to be, and I don't use this word lightly, a unique idea, almost a one of a kind in the world. It has to be that. If you can go and say, well, that's kind of been done before, but it's just a different place. That's not that's don't do it. And you'll also mature as an artist, and you'll figure things out. And you will, like going on a long walk and thinking about a problem that you're trying to solve. That's sometimes what it takes with a book. It's going to take years, literally, until you come up with that really good idea. And look at other books.
yeah.
That's really important. I think a message to your viewers is, if they don't, there are a lot of genres and a lot of books you're going to go, I don't get it. Well, you may not, but guess what? There's other people in the world who do get it. And they may get it to the point where they're saying, that person really has a vision. They have a way of seeing the world that is uniquely theirs. and it really resonates at a really different emotional level.
Hmm.
And that's really hard to do. And you have to look at your work and say, does, even individual images, but does this resonate? It resonates for me. I can conjure up where, when, how, what, why, lighting, blah blah blah. But will this really resonate? I mean, and I say, we all kind of go, well, not so much. But now you're going to do a book, and every single photograph has to resonate in that way. That's a tall order.
Big time.
And yeah, and then to integrate that, especially if you've got writers or you're doing the writing. I mean, there's a whole nother thing, writing. Great writers aren't just born, like Van Gogh, right? Van Gogh spent 2 years just drafting, right? And until he could execute something that he and writing is the same way. And so now you're a photographer and you've been doing this for 5 or 6 years, but you haven't been writing, and now you're going to write for a
Right.
book that you're going to say, this
Right.
is who I am, this is me, this is my work of art that I'm going to put out there into the world. Those are all very, very big asks of oneself.
Mm.
So yeah.
Yeah. Important to
Oh,
develop all those skills.
and then to say, oh, my photographs tell a story. No, they don't. What story do they tell? Landscape, that picture in back of me. What story does that tell? It doesn't tell a story at all. So now you're bound to do a narrative either by one photograph after another. That's why moving pictures are so good, right? You can
Right.
follow the moving picture. But now is your seeing so unique and distinctive? Are you so awake to the light and your vision and the way you compose that when someone looks at your image, they're just blown away by it as a singular artwork? That's not a story. That's being blown away by a piece of art. And
Mm.
does your work do that? And to me, when I start to think about the medium and the art process and the art of photography, if you start to dig that deep into yourself and your work, I think that call it a challenge, or that thinking that has to go into it. It just all of a sudden photography becomes this big, huge world about yourself and about and it ain't easy.
I agree with all that. 100%. All right, Claude. So, last question. Tell us about some other photographers you'd recommend our audience learn more about.
Doug Robinson, who is a writer and not a photographer, but he was a friend of Galen's, and Doug does some interesting writing. But Steve Selensky, who I've mentioned, is a contemporary of like Richard Misrachs and Huntington Witherall. Huntington Witherall is a black and white photographer, and he did a book called Orchestrating Icons, and he's just wonderful. Brooks Jensen is a big fan of Hunt's work, and then John Warzenek, and John has the finest portfolio of New England, and I think his website is called Light Song Fine Art. I really wish John would. He'd be an interesting interview, as would Steve. They both would be really interesting. Look at Obata. Look at Cape Light, Joel Meyerowitz. Here's Orchestrating Icons.
Mhm.
I mean, it. Oh, and here, um, this book. This is done by my
Oh, yeah, I've
very.
seen that book. Yeah, yeah.
It was done by my close friend Paul Kalmus, and These photographs are from not the turn of this century, the turn of last century.
Right.
And barring some of the technical problems with them, compositions are unbelievable. The light is unbelievable. Skill set of 40,000 negatives housed in handmade mahogany boxes stored in Italy in a cave. It's mountain photography oriented.
And for people who aren't watching, what's it called?
It's called Summit, and the photographer is Vittorio Sella, and the publisher is Aperture.
Perfect. Awesome, Claude. Well, this has been great. It's good. It's been great to catch up.
Yeah, it was good to catch up. It was fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you to Claude for joining me this week on the podcast. As always, I'd love to hear listeners' thoughts about this week's episode over on Patreon. Whenever I release a new episode, it goes to our higher tier Patreon supporters first, often months in advance. On the scheduled public release date, that post on Patreon becomes public, and then anyone, even free members, can join in on the conversation. Just go to patreon.com/fstop and listen to join in on the conversation. Or look for a link in the show notes. I can't wait to see you there. Cheers. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.